chilly and breezy day here in Idaho, and today we're looking at my M997A2 Ambulance. A couple weeks ago she started a transmission leak from two different spots. Since she doesn't fit in my garage, as you can see here, she's a little too tall. We are in my driveway, which is currently dirty from cleaning out said garage because the other one's in a museum. But the goal of today's video is hopefully it's hoses. We have hose clamps and a hose. I'm gonna cut it up and fix it. And if not, we will dive into it together and see what comes of it. Hopefully this is helpful for someone. So stick around. All right, so I've looked this over a little bit. As you can see here, the transfer case does have a drop on here. Swing down underneath. The shaft has some on it as well. Looking up into this section here, that hose right there might be loose. There's a hose coming off of that line as well. That's soaked. There we go. Better on the flashlight. So I'm hoping that's just a loose line or a cracked line, because I don't see anything else possibly in this area, like a busted main line or anything like that. I'm hoping it's not the seal right here on the shaft. I highly doubt it's the transfer case seal, especially considering those are soaked. And then as we move closer to the front here, we have this cluster of hoses, right? Well, first thing I notice is there's some bare metal where the coating isn't on it. And I'm wondering if the hose just slipped, like a loosened hose clamp and it slipped up, started leaking. But it is wet somewhat up to even those further up hoses. So I'm gonna have to play with the hoses here, see which one's loose, see which one's the problem. It could very well be that all of them need to come out. If that's the case, I don't think I have enough hose for that. But I'm betting the transfer case one, let me scoot back up here, this guy here, I'm betting it's just a loose hose. Now, I could just tighten the hose and be good with that. The thing though is, on my 1123, the cooling loop on the transfer case itself busted. So it started dumping transmission fluid in the transfer case, so I bypassed it. This is the same transfer case, same cooling loop, so I think I'm just going to bypass it ahead of time so I don't worry about just dumping fluid into the transfer case and grenading my transmission. So I think I'm just going to do that and be done with it. But yeah, that's what I found so far. But on the plus side, she's not really leaking anything else down here. I mean, starter's in good condition. There's a little bit of seepage around the oil pan, but nothing crazy. The biggest issue I noticed is my radiator guard, or whatever that's called, is a bit chewed up, and my fan blades actually stick out below it. So if I'm going through a puddle fast enough or starts getting kicked up, it might take out my radiator blade, and that would be a problem. So I think I'm gonna have to get that fixed here in a bit. But otherwise, no diesel fluid leaks. Portals are good. All the other stuff looks to be pretty good except for transmission. So, yeah. All right. I'll get back to you when I get it taken care of, or I come across something different. All right. It's like a week later. We had a good-sized storm come through. It got really cold, windy, rainy. And we had a few in between the last few days. So I decided to cut my losses at the transfer case and not do the other part. But what I did so far is on the transfer case cooling loop, you can see this pinched line here. That is a new line doubling back onto the transfer case itself. So the cooling loop inside just basically stays inside and doesn't run at the cooling system like the radiator up front. And I just ran this one back on itself without the pinch in it, because you still need to actually have a cooling loop for the transmission. All this wet still on here is just because it hasn't gone anywhere and done anything yet. However, I did fire this up, and this cluster got some new fluid. I haven't worked on this one yet because of that storm, but there's fluid up at that top hose here, running down everything, and it looks like at this junction, this chaotic junction here, there's some seepage or just a leak, and maybe some here as well. So potentially 3 spots, because all this just runs from up in here, and that main hose way back up there, it was running down this guy. So that might be the problem. I'll figure that out here shortly. But I did notice on the transfer case one, there's a better view of part of it. Yeah, so there is the cooling loop with just a fuel hose doubling back on it. The lines themselves were actually in decent shape, but they age and they leak. The biggest issue was 2 of the hose clamps were actually loose. But instead of just tightening those and moving on, I decided just to replace it all for safety's sake. But yeah, that's where we are so far. Now to tackle the next part. All right, so I got those hoses off. Left is for the higher connections, right is for the lower connections. Very similar. Hose lengths are a little bit different. It's just original hoses. They got old, they started to fall apart. You can see through them, permanently indented from the rings. Kind of a pain to get to a few of them just due to where they put the hose clamps, but nothing too crazy. I will be replicating new hoses, or not replicating, replacing with new hoses, and replicating this setup and putting them back in. All right, I reused the T's, put the new hoses on, new clamps. I don't like reusing old hose clamps, but those were US made and these are Chinese, so I may come to regret that decision, but we shall see. But cut the lines the same size, roughly, maybe a little bit longer. And now for the install. Alrighty. You can see the new hoses on here. I just got done firing her up, running her for a little bit to see if the pressure causes any leaks. There are no leaks. She's still a little damp at the connector pieces, just left over from old, but no leaks. At this point, I always recommend picking up 6 feet of fuel line, 3/8 fuel line, so you can do this section and the transfer case cooling loop. But so far, she is holding, she's not leaking. All the connections look nice and dry. I don't know why that hose clamp is loose, but it's not actually on anything. Marine Corps, gotta love it. Also, I don't know why that's damp. That could be splashback, that could be who knows what, pressure blowing up on there. I don't know. I'll figure that out in the next problem. But in the meantime, the transmission lines are looking good. Now to roll her out, get her level, and get her warmed up, and add fluid. Alrighty. Took her for a spin after adding some fluid. She needed a little bit, nothing crazy. She wasn't leaking that long. It's weird that all the hoses decided to leak at the same time, but I guess that's government obsolescence for you. She's not leaking anymore. Took her to O'Reilly's, picked up another oil filter because you can never have enough for these things. And now she's ready to go for the next adventure, which is probably going to be in a museum. But hey, at least she won't be leaking on the floor, right? Until next time, Idaho Humvee.